In a galaxy teetering on the edge of collapse, an exiled human warrior is summoned by a dying alien overlord with an impossible request: inherit his empire. And his two genetically bonded wives. As war brews and betrayal simmers in every corridor, Commander Riven Holt must defy ancient traditions, face off against alien warlords, and learn to lead through love, not conquest. But in the shadows, a plot unfolds that could unravel not only his legacy, but the fragile peace between stars. "My two alien wives are yours now, human," the dying Baron said. The message arrived as Riven was cleaning blood from his combat knife. The holographic interface on his wrist flashed with an urgent priority signal, one he hadn't seen in one stellar rotation. Recipient Commander Riven Holt Cinder House. Vox priority. Absolute Riven froze the blade half-polished in his hand. House Vox meant Overlord Care Vox himself. The last time they'd spoken, they were pulling shrapnel from each other's bodies after the siege of Crest Station. Play message. Riven commanded, setting the knife down. The hologram expanded, and the familiar face of Warlord Trask, the Baron's loyal commander, appeared. The alien's rigid carapace around his neck had gained new battle markings since Riven had last seen him, and one of his 4 eyes had been replaced with a cybernetic implant that glowed a dull orange. Human Riven Overlord Care Vox summons you to his personal fortress on Virelian Prime immediately. The Baron is dying. He requests your presence before he joins the honored dead. Transport has been arranged. Coordinates attached. The message ended abruptly, typical of Warlord Trask's direct communication style. Riven stared at the empty space where the hologram had been, memories flooding back of the battles they'd fought together. Overlord Care Vox. The fierce alien warlord had been the only one of his kind to value human combat tactics. While others of his species dismissed humans as soft and weak, Vox had recognized the strategic innovations Riven brought to the battlefield. And now he was dying. 3 hours later, Riven's transport ship dropped out of hyperspace above Virelian Prime, the jewel of Vox's territories. The planet's violet atmosphere swirled with electrical storms, a natural defense that had helped House Vox maintain dominance for generations. Approaching Citadel of Vox Eternum, the ship's AI announced receiving landing protocols. Below, a massive structure emerged from the swirling clouds, a fortress city carved into a mountain with spires that pierced the electroveil. Riftfield above energy shields shimmered in a dome around the central palace. The landing was smooth, despite the atmospheric turbulence. Riven stepped onto the platform dressed in his formal mercenary armor, polished black plates with the red insignia of his former combat unit. He'd fought in countless battles across a dozen star systems, but facing whatever awaited him inside the fortress suddenly seemed more daunting. Warlord Trask was waiting, flanked by 4 elite guards whose ceremonial armor glinted with symbols of House Vox. "You came quickly, good Warlord." Trask's mandibles clicked with what Riven recognized as approval. "The Baron's condition deteriorates by the hour." "What happened to him?" Riven asked, falling into step beside the commander as they entered the fortress. "Unknown illness. Our medical adepts are baffled. It began 7 orbitals prior with weakness, then progressed to organ failure." Riven noticed the fortress was unusually quiet. The normal bustle of a military headquarters subdued to whispers and essential movements. The gravity felt slightly heavier than he remembered, or perhaps it was the weight of what was happening. They passed through massive halls lined with trophies from 100 campaigns. Weapons captured from defeated enemies hung alongside battle standards and ceremonial armor from fallen warriors of note. At the end of a long corridor, 2 figures stood outside an ornate doorway. Conclave High Seer Malrix and someone Riven didn't recognize, both engaged in heated discussion. Malrix turned as they approached, his ancient eyes narrowing at the sight of Riven. The elder's withered skin was covered in wisdom markings, intricate patterns that recorded a lifetime of service to House Elton. "So the human arrives," Malrix said, his voice a dry rasp. "Why the Baron wants you here remains a mystery to us all." Elder Warlord Trask warned, "The Baron's wishes are not for us to question." Riven maintained eye contact with Malrix, knowing that among the Baron's people looking away would signal weakness. "I'm here at the Baron's request. Nothing more. We shall see," Malrix replied, stepping aside. The doors parted, and Riven entered the Baron's private chambers. The room was dimly lit with view screens showing the electrical storms outside. In the center, on an elevated platform, lay Overlord Care Vox himself. The once imposing figure was diminished, his exoskeleton dulled, and his breathing labored. Medical equipment surrounded the platform, attended by silent medical adepts. On either side of him stood two female figures, Niara and Kara Zinthra, the Baron's wives, each watching. Riven with unreadable expressions. Human Riven. The Baron's voice was weaker than Riven remembered, but still carried the unmistakable tone of command. "You honor me with your prompt arrival." Riven approached, bowing his head in the traditional manner of respect. "Baron, I came as soon as I received your message." Vox's upper limb gestured weakly, dismissing the medical staff. "Leave us. I'll accept my wives and the human." The adepts withdrew immediately. Warlord Trask hesitated, then followed them out the doors, sealing behind him. "You look terrible," Riven said, allowing a small smile. A rasping sound emerged from the Baron's laughter. Riven realized, even facing the final gate, "You speak truth without fear." Vox said, "It is why I've summoned you, Riven of Earth. I am dying, and what comes next will determine the future of House Vox." The Baron's gaze shifted to his wives, then back to Riven. "I have made my decision. You, Commander Riven Holt, will inherit my title, my territories, and my household." Riven felt the floor seemed to tilt beneath him. "Your two wives," Riven began, then stopped, certain he had misunderstood, "are yours now." "Human," the dying Baron said. Silence filled the chamber. Riven stared at Overlord Care Vox, searching for any sign that this was some cultural misunderstanding or the delirium of a dying mind. "Baron Riven began. "The decision is made." Vox interrupted, his voice suddenly stronger. "Our laws are clear. A worthy successor must be chosen before death. I choose you." Seraphine Veltari stepped forward, her iridescent scaled skin catching the dim light of the chamber. Her vertical pupils fixed on Riven with calculating intensity. "My husband has made his choice." She said, her voice melodic but cool, though unconventional. "It is his right." On the Baron's other side, Kara Zinthra remained motionless, her muscular form tense beneath subtle armor integrated into her body. Unlike Seraphine Veltari's diplomatic poise, Kara Zinthra's posture suggested barely contained aggression. The warrior wife's skin rippled slightly, shifting from deep blue to a threatening purple. "How can I accept this?" Riven asked. "Your people barely tolerate human presence in your territories. They'll never accept me as Baron." Vox's mandibles clicked weakly. "They need not accept you. They need only fear you." He gestured Riven closer. "Come, there is little time." Riven approached the platform. Up close, Vox looked worse, the illness eating away at him from within, leaving his once impressive exoskeleton brittle and discolored. "You fought differently than any warrior I had seen," Vox said, when others would have charged. "You retreated. When they would have retreated, you stood firm. Your human ways confused my enemies. They will confuse my rivals now." The Baron reached for a ceremonial dagger at his side, its blade curved and inscribed with ancient symbols. "Your blood with mine," he commanded. Riven hesitated only briefly before extending his hand. The dagger sliced across his palm, then Vox's. Their blood mingled human red with the Baron's viscous blue. Witness Vox called to his wives. "By blood and voice I name Commander Riven Holt my successor. My titles, my territories, my household all passed to him upon my joining the honored dead." The chamber doors burst open. Malrix stormed in, followed by Warlord Trask and several elite guards. "This is sacrilege," Malrix hissed, his ceremonial staff striking the floor. "No human has ever held title among our kind, yet one will now." Vox replied, his voice fading. "The blood, Right is complete. Warlord Trask stepped forward, his cybernetic eye scanning the blood mingling between Riven and the Baron. The right appears valid. High Seer Malric's guards. Malrix commanded, "Remove the human." The guards looked to Warlord Trask, who stood motionless, caught between tradition and loyalty. "If you interfere with succession," Nihara spoke softly, "you violate our most sacred law." Riven squared his shoulders, facing Malrix directly. "I didn't ask for this, but I won't dishonor the Baron's choice by refusing." Malrix's ancient eyes narrowed to slits. "This will mean war between houses. Lord Varel Thorn has already sent envoys demanding succession rights through his blood connection." Lord Varel Thorn. Vox whispered the name like a curse. "He waits like a scavenger." The Baron's grip on Riven's arm tightened. "Promise me, human, protect what is mine." Riven nodded. "I promise." Malrix stormed out his staff, striking the floor with each step. Warlord Trask lingered, his posture stiff with uncertainty. Commander Riven said, drawing on one stellar rotation of battlefield authority, "Secure the fortress, double the guards on all approaches." Warlord Trask's mandibles clicked once. "As you command," he left with the guards, leaving Riven alone with the Baron and his wives. Vox's breathing became more labored. Seraphine Veltari knows the politics. Kara Zinthra knows the military trust them as. "I have." His voice grew fainter. "But remember, they are yours now. Not advisors, wives." Riven met the gaze of both women. Seraphine Veltari's expression remained unreadable, while Kara Zinthra's skin had darkened further with what Riven recognized as barely suppressed rage. "I'll need their counsel," Riven said diplomatically. "More than counsel," Vox insisted, "our ways." His voice trailed off as a spasm racked his body. The medical adepts rushed back in, working frantically over the Baron. A firm hand gripped Riven's arm, pulling him away. It was Seraphine Veltari. "Come," she said, "there are preparations to make." She led him through a side door into an adjacent chamber, Kara Zinthra following silently. The room was clearly a private conclave chamber with star maps and territory displays covering the walls. "If you value your life." Kara Zinthra spoke for the first time, her voice surprisingly soft but edged with threat. "You will renounce this claim when he dies." Seraphine Veltari cautioned. "No." Kara Zinthra continued, moving closer to Riven. "I will not be handed to a human like a war trophy." Riven met her gaze steadily. "I didn't ask for this either. Yet here you stand." Kara Zinthra replied, her hand dropping to a ceremonial blade at her hip, ready to claim what isn't yours. "Enough, Seraphine!" Veltari intervened. "Vox's decision is made. We honor it as tradition demands." A distant alarm suddenly blared through the fortress. Thargon's voice echoed over the communication system. "Perimeter breach. All warriors to defensive positions." That Kara Zinthra said, drawing her blade, would be Krovak's answer to your succession. The attack on the fortress had been nothing more than a probing strike. Krovak's testing the defenses, and Riven's response. 3 chronophase turns later, as Overlord Care Vox continued his slow decline, Riven found himself in the fortress training grounds, surrounded by elite guards, watching him with mixtures of curiosity and contempt. "Your stance is wrong," Thargon said, circling Riven as he held a traditional Kaldraxian war staff. "You favor your right side too, obviously." Riven adjusted, feeling the unfamiliar weight of the weapon. The training armor he wore was heavier than his mercenary gear, designed for the denser musculature of Vox's species. "The weapon is balanced differently than what I'm used to," Riven replied, spinning the staff experimentally. Thargon struck without warning, his own staff whipping toward Riven's head. Riven barely ducked in time, the weapon whistling past his ear. "Enemies will not wait for you to become comfortable," Thargon said. Riven nodded and reset his stance. The gathered warriors watched in silence as Thargon attacked again. This time, instead of trying to match the alien's superior strength, Riven sidestepped and used the momentum of Thargon's swing against him, sweeping the commander's legs. Thargon recovered quickly, mandibles clicking, and what Riven had learned was approval. "Human techniques interesting. different, not better or worse," Riven replied. "Just unexpected." From the edge of the training grounds, Riven caught sight of Niara watching her elegant form draped in ceremonial robes that marked her status. When their eyes met, she tilted her head slightly before turning away. The session continued for another hour. Riven adapting human combat moves to the alien weapons. By the end, he had earned, if not respect, then at least curiosity from the watching guards. "You will join the conclave session tomorrow," Thargan said as they left the training grounds. "High Seer Malrix has called the clan representatives to discuss succession. Discuss or challenge, Riven asked. "With Malrix, they are the same." Thargan replied, "Lady Niara has requested to brief you before the meeting." Riven nodded. "Where do I find her?" "The Starlight Ascension deck. She prefers the view of the storm plains." Riven made his way through the fortress, still learning its labyrinthine corridors. Servants and warriors alike stepped aside as he passed their movements, stiff with reluctance to show deference to a human. The Starlight Ascension deck was a domed chamber with transparent walls that offered a panoramic view of Kalidra's violent landscape. Massive electrical storms rolled across the horizon, purple lightning illuminating clouds the color of bruises. Niara stood alone at the viewing platform, her scaled skin reflecting the lightning flashes like scattered gems. "Your training session was informative," she said without turning. "You were watching the whole time. I make it my business to observe everything in this fortress." Now she turned her vertical pupils dilating slightly, especially potential threats. "Am I still considered a threat?" Riven asked, moving to stand beside her at the platform. "You are an unknown quantity," she replied, "which can be more dangerous than a known enemy." Outside, a particularly violent lightning strike split the sky, momentarily bathing them both in electric blue light. "The conclave tomorrow," Riven said. "What should I expect? Challenges to your legitimacy. Questions about your intentions. Malrix will lead the opposition openly. Others will watch to see how you respond before choosing sides. And your advice." Niara's lips curved into what might have been a smile. "Show strength, but not aggression. Among our kind, thoughtful restraint is respected more than mindless dominance." Like Vox Riven said, "Yes, it is why he succeeded where others failed and why he chose you." She turned fully toward him. "He saw something in you that reminded him of himself. I have yet to see it." Riven matched her gaze, and what of Xyla? "She seems determined to hate me." Kara Zinthra was a warrior from the Northern Territories given to Vox to seal an alliance. She fought beside him in 17 campaigns and saved his life twice. Her loyalty to him is absolute, and her loyalty to his successor. "That remains to be earned," came a voice from behind them. Kara Zinthra stood in the doorway, her athletic form silhouetted against the corridor lights. She wore combat armor that integrated seamlessly with her body, highlighting the powerful muscles beneath. Her skin had settled into a deep blue, calmer than the threatening purple it had been during their first meeting. Interrupting a private conversation, Niara asked, one eyebrow ridge rising. "When it concerns me, yes." Kara Zinthra approached, moving with predatory grace. "You wish to know where my loyalties lie." "Human Riven," he corrected. "And yes, I'd like to know. Then prove yourself worthy of an answer." Xyla unsheathed a training blade from her hip. "Face me now." Niara stepped between them. "The conclave meeting is tomorrow." "This is hardly the time." "It's exactly the time," Xyla interrupted. "If he cannot face me, how can he face Lord Varel Thorn's champions?" Riven considered the challenge. Refusing would show weakness, but accepting might reveal combat techniques he'd rather keep hidden. "Fine," he said, taking the blade Xyla offered. "Where? Here now?" Xyla moved to the center of the observatory clearing space with a sweep of her foot. First blood or yield. Riven took position opposite her, adapting the stance he'd practiced with Warlord Trask. The blade was lighter than the staff, better suited to his human reflexes. Without warning, Xyla attacked her movements blindingly fast. Riven reacted instinctively, deflecting rather than blocking, using her momentum to sidestep the assault. You fight defensively, Zyla observed, circling him, afraid to attack patient. Riven corrected, there's a difference. Zyla struck again, a flurry of slashes that drove Riven back toward the observation window. He countered with a move that would have been effective against a human opponent, but merely glanced off Zyla's armored forearm. Our physiologies are different, Zyla said, pressing her advantage. What works against your kind fails against us. Riven absorbed the lesson, adjusting his strategy. When Zyla came at him again, he dropped lower than she anticipated, targeting the joint behind her knee, where he'd noticed less armor coverage during their exchange. The blade made contact, not enough to draw blood, but sufficient to unbalance her. Zyla stumbled momentarily, surprise registering in her eyes. You learn quickly, she acknowledged, resuming her stance. Their blades continued to clash as lightning illuminated the observatory in strobing flashes. Riven found himself admiring the efficiency of Zyla's movements, the perfect economy of force that spoke of years of disciplined training. In a swift combination, Zyla feinted left, then spun right, her blades slicing a thin line across Riven's upper arm. Blood welled through the torn fabric. First blood to me, Zyla declared, lowering her weapon. Riven nodded, acknowledging the hit. Well fought. Zyla studied him, her expression unreadable. You adapted to counter my strengths, used my momentum against me. These are not typical tactics of your species in battle. I'm not a typical human. Perhaps that is why Vox chose you. Zyla resheathed her blade. You are still unworthy of his title, but perhaps not as unworthy as I first thought. From the doorway, slow applause interrupted them. High Seer Malrix stood watching, his ancient face creased with disapproval. Combat rituals with the wives already human. He rasped, presumptuous, even for an outsider. A training exercise. Elder Nyara interjected smoothly. Nothing more. Indeed. Malrix's gaze shifted between the three of them. The Baron's condition has worsened. The medical adepts give him until morning. His eyes settled on Riven. Enjoy your temporary position while you can, human. By tomorrow's nightfall, the fortress will have a proper leader again. The elder departed, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. He's aligned with Lord Varel Thorn, Nyara said quietly. The conclave session will be a trap. Riven looked from her to Zyla, then to the raging storms beyond the observatory glass. Then we'll need to be prepared with a surprise of our own. Overlord, Vox died as the first light of Varelian Prime's sun breached the Electrovale rift field. Riven stood beside the deathbed with Nyara and Zyla, watching as the once mighty warrior drew his final breath. The succession is complete. Warlord Trask announced, formally activating his comm unit. Alert the clan house's overlord Vox has joined the honored dead. Riven felt the weight of the moment pressed down on him. Despite their brief reunion, Vox's death left an unexpected emptiness, the loss of a comrade who had seen something in him worth believing in. The mourning period lasts one rotation, Nyara explained quietly. Then the conclave confirms the succession, or challenges it. Zyla added, her skin darkening with emotion. The medical adepts moved forward to prepare the Baron's body for the ceremonial rites. As they removed the life support equipment, Riven noticed something unusual, a faint discoloration around a healing puncture mark on the Baron's neck. Wait, Riven said, stepping closer. What's that? The Lid Adepts paused, a routine medication site. My Lord Riven's combat instincts, honed through years of battlefield awareness, flared with suspicion. When was this administered? 7 orbitals prior, when the illness accelerated. Riven glanced at Nyara, whose subtle nod confirmed she'd noticed it too. Preserved tissue samples from that area Riven ordered before any funeral preparations. The adept looked uncertainly toward Warlord Trask. Do as he says, the commander ordered after a moment's hesitation. Later, in Vox's private study, Riven examined the Baron's medical records while Nyara paced beside the massive desk. His decline was too rapid, she said, even for toxin fever, which was the official diagnosis. Riven nodded, scrolling through the data. The symptoms match, but the progression doesn't. He pointed to a chart. See here, his organ systems failed in sequence, not simultaneously as toxin fever typically presents. You have medical training. Niara asks, surprise evident in her tone. Combat medicine. You learn to recognize different types of poisoning when fighting across multiple systems. The door slid open and Kara Zinthra entered, her movements tense with barely contained energy. Grief had hardened her features into a mask of control. The funeral preparations are underway, she reported. Lord Virel Thorn's envoy has arrived to pay respects and probably assess our defenses. Riven muttered. Without question, Kara Zinthra moved to a wall display showing the fortress layout. I've doubled the guard rotations and secured the armory. Riven studied her, noting the disciplined compartmentalization of her grief into action. It was a soldier's response, one he recognized from his own past. We need those tissue samples analyzed, he said. Someone not connected to the fortress medical staff. Niara stepped forward. I have contacts in the scientific settlement to the south, researchers outside the clan structure. Can they be trusted? Riven asked. They owe me favors, Niara replied, a dangerous smile playing across her lips. Substantial ones, Riven nodded. Make the arrangements? As Niara left to secure a courier, Riven found himself alone with Kara Zinthra. The warrior wife stood rigid, staring at a ceremonial weapon that had belonged to Vox, a curved blade mounted on the wall. He wielded that at the Battle of Ixion, Riven said, recognizing the distinctive design. Kara Zinthra's head turned sharply. You were there. East Quadrant, my unit was pinned down when Vox's forces broke through the enemy line. I was with him, Kara Zinthra said, quietly leading the right flank. Riven moved to stand beside her. The lightning assault, that was you! A hint of pride broke through her grief. My strategy, Vox approved it despite the risk. It saved hundreds of lives, including mine. Silence stretched between them, filled with the strange intimacy of shared battlefield memories. If Vox was murdered, Kara Zinthra said finally, her voice low and dangerous, I will tear the killer apart with my bare hands. If he was murdered, Riven replied, it was likely on Lord Virel Thorn's orders. We'll need more than vengeance. We'll need proof to sway the conclave. Kara Zinthra's eyes met his, something shifting in their depths. You think like a commander, not just a warrior. I've been both. The door slid open as Niara returned. The courier leaves within the hour. We should have results by morning. Too late for the conclave session, Kara Zinthra noted. Then we delay. Riven said, use the mourning period traditions to buy time. Niara nodded approvingly. A legitimate tactic, the sacred rites must be observed before succession can be formalized, which gives us until tomorrow's sunfall. Riven concluded. The fortress intercom chimed, and Warlord Trask's voice filled the room. Lord Riven High, Seer Malrix requests your presence in the ceremony hall. Lord Virel Thorn's representative wishes to pay respects to the fallen Baron. Riven exchanged glances with both wives. Time to meet the opposition. The ceremony hall was a vast chamber with vaulted ceilings and ancient battle banners hanging from stone pillars. Overlord Care Vox's body had been placed on a ceremonial platform, dressed in his full battle regalia. Incense burned in ornate holders, filling the air with a spicy metallic scent. High Seer Malrix stood beside the platform with a tall, heavily armored figure, Lord Virel Thorn's representative. As Riven entered, flanked by Niara and Zilla, he immediately recognized the insignia of Lord Virel Thorn's house, emblazoned on the visitor's armor. Lord Riven Malrix said, the title sounding like an insult in his raspy voice. May I present War Captain Vakhor of House Lord Virel Thorn, come to honor our fallen Baron. War Captain Vakhor's armor was adorned with trophy pieces, fragments taken from defeated enemies. His face was partially obscured by a ceremonial half-mask, but his eyes fixed on Riven with predatory assessment. The human successor, Captain Vakhor, said, his voice a guttural rumble. My lord, Lord Virel Thorn, sends his surprise at Overlord Care Vox's choice. Your lord's concern is noted, Riven replied evenly. Please convey my thanks for his prompt condolences. Captain Vakor made a gesture that might have been respectful in form, but was clearly dismissive in execution. Lord Varel Thorn also wishes to inform you that he will be attending the succession conclave personally. As bloodkin to the Baron, he has concerns about the legitimacy of a human claim to Vox's territories. The gene oath ceremony was performed according to tradition. Seraphine Veltari interjected smoothly. Witnessed and verified. Traditions can be misinterpreted. Malrix added, his ancient eyes gleaming with malice. The conclave will determine the true succession. Riven stepped forward, moving closer to Vox's body. The Baron made his choice clear. I intend to honor it. Bold words. Captain Vakor said, for one so new to our customs, his gaze shifted to Zella, the Seraphine Veltari, and to the responsibilities of managing a proper household. The implication hung in the air deliberately, provocative. Riven felt Zela tense beside him, her hand drifting toward her weapon. Captain Vakor Riven said, keeping his voice level, your master's interest in House Vox's affairs predates the Baron's passing, doesn't it? Captain Vakor's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. Lord Krovax has always maintained proper relations with neighboring territories, including sending medical emissaries 7 orbitals prior. Riven asked, watching carefully for a reaction. There a barely perceptible shift in Captain Vakor's stance, a momentary hesitation before he replied, I am not privy to all diplomatic exchanges. Of course. Riven nodded. Please inform Lord Krovax that House Vox looks forward to addressing all his concerns at the next Dawnrise conclave. Captain Vakor performed a formal bow that somehow managed to convey threat rather than respect. Until tomorrow then. After the war, Captain departed, escorted by Thargon's guards. Malrix lingered, his withered face unreadable. You play a dangerous game, human, the elder said quietly. Krovax commands 3 times the military force. You do, I'm aware of the odds, elder. Yet you persist. Malrix studied him with ancient eyes. Perhaps you are more like Vox than I first believed. He too courted destruction with unusual strategies. The elder turned to leave, then paused. It did not save him in the end. When Malrix had gone, Riven turned to find both Seraphine Veltari and Zilla watching him with new expressions. Seraphine Veltari with calculating assessment, Zilla with reluctant interest. Captain Vakor's reaction. Seraphine Veltari said you noticed it too. Riven nodded when I mentioned medical emissaries. He knew something. Krovax sent the poison. Zilla concluded, her skin darkening to an angry purple. We should attack now before the conclave can rule against you. No, Riven said that's exactly what they want. An impulsive reaction they can use to prove humans are unfit to lead. Then what do you propose? Seraphine Veltari asked. Riven looked down at Vox's still form, remembering the Baron's words about human tactics confusing his enemies. We need proof, he said, and a strategy they won't expect. Dawn broke over the fortress with an unusual clarity. The Electro-Veil rift field temporarily thinning to allow unfiltered sunlight to bathe the mountain stronghold. Riven stood on the eastern balcony watching as Vox's body was prepared for the honored dead ritual that would take place before the succession conclave. The tissue analysis arrived. Seraphine Veltari's voice came from behind him. She held a secure data tablet, her expression grave. Riven took the tablet, scrolling through the scientific data. Though some terms were unfamiliar, the conclusion was unmistakable. Synthetic neurotoxin, slow-acting, designed to mimic toxin fever, and completely foreign to our medical databases. Seraphine Veltari added it had to be imported, which requires high-level authorization through the orbital checkpoints. Can we trace it? Already done. Seraphine Veltari stepped closer, her scaled fingers swiping to a new screen. The compound entered through the southern spaceport 2 cycles before Vox fell ill, carried by a diplomatic envoy from House Lord Varel Thorn. Circumstantial, Riven noted, but compelling. Does Zila know? I informed her this morning. She's Seraphine Veltari. Paused, choosing her words carefully, processing the information, which meant Riven suspected that the warrior wife was channeling her rage into preparation for violence. Where is she now? The armory. She requested access to Vox's personal weaponry for the funeral rites. Riven nodded, understanding the significance, a traditional honor for a bonded warrior. Seraphine Veltari's eyes widened slightly. You've studied our customs. I've had access to Vox's private library. I spent most of the night reading. Most humans wouldn't bother, she observed. I'm not most humans. Riven handed back the tablet. We need to present this evidence at the conclave, but timing will be crucial. If we reveal it too early, Lord Varel Thorn could claim it's fabricated. And if we wait too long, he could secure enough votes to overrule the succession, regardless of the evidence. Riven considered the conclave dynamics. We need allies. Are there houses that would stand against Lord Varel Thorn? Few, openly. Seraphine Veltari admitted House. Tarvek lost territories to him last season and might support us. House Zinthar has historical ties to Vox's line. Make contact discreetly. Seraphine Veltari smiled, a predatory expression that transformed her elegant features. Discretion is my specialty. Riven. As she turned to leave, Riven called after her. Seraphine Veltari. She paused, looking back. Thank you for your help. Something softened in her gaze. I serve House Vox always. She hesitated, then added, but perhaps you are not as poor a choice for successor as I first thought. After she departed, Riven made his way to the armory. The vast chamber contained weapons from a dozen campaigns, everything from ceremonial blades to energy weapons capable of reducing a dropship to molten slag. Kara Zinthra stood at a weapons bench, methodically cleaning Vox's personal battle staff. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic. When she sensed Riven's presence, she spoke without looking up. You've seen the analysis? Yes, and what will you do with this knowledge? Now she turned her powerful form, coiled with restrained energy. Negotiate compromise, that is the human way, is it not? Riven approached, stopping an arm's length away. Sometimes, other times, we respond with disproportionate force to ensure the message is clear. Kara Zinthra's skin rippled with subtle color shifts. Pretty words, but I've watched humanity's wars. You hesitate, you show mercy when blood is demanded? Not always, Riven replied quietly. There are lines once crossed that change the equation, and murder of your Baron crosses such a line. My Baron, Riven repeated, studying her. You acknowledge me? Then Kara Zinthra's jaw tightened. Vox made his choice. I honor it, whatever my personal feelings. And your personal feelings. Her eyes met his unblinking. You are not Vox. You are not of our blood or bone. But she paused, seeming to struggle with the admission. You think like him, you see patterns others miss. Coming from a warrior of Kara Zinthra's standing, it was high praise indeed. I need your counsel, Riven said, not as Vox's wife or mine, but as his trusted battle commander. Something in his phrasing seemed to reach her. Kara Zinthra straightened, setting aside the weapon. How do you intend to survive today's conclave, Lord Virel? Thorn has bought or intimidated half the representatives already. By changing the nature of the confrontation, Riven replied. Lord Virel Thorn expects a political challenge, we'll give him a criminal one. Zealous expression sharpened with interest. Publicly accuse him of murder. With evidence? Yes, but we need a fallback position. If the conclave wavers, Riven moved to a tactical display embedded in the wall, activating it with a gesture. Show me the fortress defensive grid. Kara Zinthra joined him, entering command codes that brought up detailed schematics. You're preparing for an attack. I'm preparing for all contingencies, Riven corrected. Show me the weak points. They spent the next hour analyzing the fortress defenses. Kara Zinthra explaining the integration of shield technology with the natural electromagnetic properties of the electro veil rift field. Riven asked questions that revealed his experience with both offensive and defensive operations, occasionally suggesting modifications that made Kara Zinthra tilt her head in consideration. This approach, she said, pointing to a narrow canyon leading to the southern gate, could be reinforced with gravitational mines. Better yet, Riven suggested make it appear vulnerable, draw their forces into a natural choke point, then collapse the canyon walls. Kara Zinthra's eyes gleamed with approval. Deception tactics, Zeltan would appreciate the strategy. A calm alert interrupted them. Thargon's voice came through the speaker. Lord Riven, an unscheduled transport has entered our airspace house. Tarvek markings. Riven glanced at Kara Zinthra. Nyara works quickly. House Tarvek has a legitimate grievance against Krovax. Kara Zinthra noted, their heir was killed in a border dispute last season. Perfect Riven said authorized landing commander will receive them personally. The landing platform extended from the western face of the fortress, a massive structure built to accommodate military dropships. The arriving vessel was smaller, a diplomatic craft with the silver and red insignia of House Tarvek emblazoned on its hull. Riven and Kara Zinthra waited as the ship's ramp descended. Nyara emerged first, followed by an imposing female figure whose ceremonial armor marked her as a house matriarch. Lord Riven Nyara announced formally, "May I present Matriarch Sindra Kell of House Tarvek." Matriarch Sindra Kell was taller than most of her species with distinctive ridge patterns that Riven recognized as markers of Northern clan heritage. Her eyes assessed him with clinical precision. The human successor, she said, her voice deep, and resonant rumors of your appointment have spread through all territories. Most believe you will not survive the day. And what do you believe? Matriarch Riven asked. A smile curved her mandibles. I believe Overlord Kervox was no fool. If he chose you, he had reason. My lady has information regarding Lord Varel Thorn's activities that may interest you. Nyara interjected smoothly. Matriarch Sindra. Kell nodded. House Tarvek's intelligence network is extensive. We have tracked unusual financial transfers between Lord Varel Thorn's accounts and those belonging to 3 Conclave representatives. Bribes, Zila growled. Investments. They would claim Matriarch Sindra Kell corrected, but the timing coincides with Vox's illness. You have proof? Riven asked, sufficient to raise doubts in the Conclave. Matriarch Sindra Kell's gaze hardened. Lord Varel Thorn murdered my son. I would see him answer for it along with his other crimes. Riven considered the implications. You're offering an alliance. I am offering justice. Matriarch Sindra Kell replied, if that aligns with your interests, so be it. As they escorted the matriarch inside, Riven felt a presence at his side. Nyara moved close enough to speak privately. House Zintar has also agreed to support our position pending evidence of Lord Varel Thorn's treachery, she murmured, and 3 minor houses will follow their lead. You've been busy? Riven observed. As I said, I serve House Vox. Her hand brushed his arm briefly, and its rightful successor. The gesture small, though it was carried surprising weight. Riven realized that somewhere in the past days, amidst crisis and conspiracy, Nyara had moved from reluctant acceptance to genuine support. The fortress alert system suddenly blared, red warning lights pulsing along the corridors. Thargon's voice came over the communication system. Multiple warships detected exiting hyperspace. Lord Varel Thorn markings battle formations. Riven exchanged glances with Zyla, whose skin had shifted to combat readiness patterns. He's moving before the Conclave can convene. A preemptive strike, Solara confirmed grimly. Classic Lord Varel Thorn strategy. Get to the command center, Riven ordered. Nyara, secure the evidence in the Conclave chambers. Kara Zinthra, battle stations. She finished, already moving. The defense grid is prepped, as we discussed. Riven caught her arm as she passed. No heroics. We need to survive long enough to expose Lord Varel Thorn at the Conclave. Something unexpected flashed in Zyla's eyes, a momentary vulnerability beneath the warrior's discipline. Be careful, Riven. Lord Varel Thorn fights without honor. Before he could respond, she was gone, sprinting toward the armory where Vox's elite guards would be mobilizing. Nyara stepped closer, her expression serious. She's beginning to respect you perhaps more. We have bigger concerns right now, Riven replied, though the observation lingered in his thoughts. Yes, Nyara agreed, her hand sliding to a concealed weapon at her hip. Staying alive until sunset is chief among them. Above the fortress, the Electro-Veil rift field churned, with unnatural violence, as Lord Varel Thorn's warships descended through the atmosphere. Dark silhouettes against electric purple skies. He brings war to a succession conclave. Solara observed coldly. The other houses will not forget this breach of protocol. If we survive to remind them, Riven said, leading them toward the command center, as the first distant explosions shook the mountain fortress. The command center was a hive of controlled chaos when Riven arrived. Tactical displays showed Lord Varel Thorn's forces, 5 warships accompanied by numerous smaller assault craft positioning themselves in attack formation around the fortress. Shields at 80% capacity, a tactical officer reported atmospheric interference is disrupting their targeting systems. Thargan stood at the central console, his cybernetic eye pulsing as it processed battlefield data. They're focusing attack vectors on the southern approach ground troops deploying to the canyon. Just as we predicted, Riven said, moving to Thargan's side. Status of our defensive preparations. The gravitational mines are in place but not activated. Perimeter guns are online. The elite guard is deployed to defensive positions. Riven studied the tactical display. Lord Varel Thorn's strategy was aggressive but conventional. A frontal assault designed to overwhelm through superior numbers, it suggested confidence bordering on arrogance. Matriarch Solara Riven addressed the Tarvek leader who had followed him into the command center. Your assessment of Lord Varel Thorn's tactics. Solara stepped forward, her experienced gaze analyzing the deployment patterns. Classic intimidation. He shows his full strength, immediately hoping for surrender rather than resistance. And if we resist, he will target command and control systems first, then power generation standard siege methodology. Riven nodded, turning to Thargan. Evacuate non-essential personnel from the upper levels. Move Vox's body to the secure vault beneath the ceremonial hall and send a priority communication to all conclave houses. What message? Thargan asked. That Lord Varel Thorn attacks during sacred morning rites, violating our most hallowed traditions. Invite them to witness his disrespect for our laws. Thargan's mandibles clicked in approval. Political warfare effective and accurate. Riven added, now show me our troop deployments. The display shifted to show the fortress's defensive positions. Riven immediately noticed the conventional deployment troops evenly distributed along the perimeter, following standard doctrine. This won't work, he said. Lord Varel Thorn expects this pattern. We need to adapt. These are traditional defensive formations. Thargan objected, proven effective for generations against traditional attackers. Riven countered, Lord Varel Thorn knows these formations as well as you do. He's already planned counters. Solara stepped closer. The human is right. Predictability is death against Lord Varel. Thorn Riven's heart pounded as he stared at the tactical display, his mind racing through the choices before him. The command center's low hum was punctuated by urgent voices, and every decision now bore the weight of legacy and loss. Lord Riven Thargan intoned, his voice clipped and unwavering. The southern flank is under intense scrutiny. Enemy warships are closing in. Riven's eyes flicked to Nyara and Zilla, whose expressions were as fierce as they were tender. We stand at a crossroads. He declared, his tone resolute. Do we let vengeance devour us, or do we protect what remains of our household and honor Vox's legacy? Nyara stepped forward, her voice soft yet imbued with steely determination. Our mourning is not a weakness. Riven, it's the crucible in which our resolve is forged. I believe our grief can become the beacon that guides us through this darkness. As she spoke, her hand brushed against his, a silent promise of unity and understanding. Zilla's deep, resonant voice interjected, I will not allow Vox's death to be exploited for blind retribution. We must act with both passion and precision. You speak like a true commander, yet I see in you the heart of a man who feels deeply beyond the battlefield. Her eyes, usually so hard and unyielding, softened in that rare moment as they met. His Riven exhaled slowly. I choose our future, he said, his voice trembling slightly with the weight of his decision. I refuse to let our actions be driven solely by the desire for vengeance. Instead, I will blend our ancient traditions with the unexpected art of human diplomacy. I choose you both not as symbols of conquest, but as the beating heart of my new life. Before he could say more, an alarm shattered the fragile calm. A covert assailant burst through the corridor, and in the ensuing chaos, a flash of energy narrowly missed Riven. In an instant, Nyara leapt forward, intercepting the lethal strike with graceful fluid movement. "Riven!" she cried, pulling him into a hidden alcove away from the tumult. Her eyes shone with concern and something far more intimate, something that transcended duty. "I cannot bear the thought of losing you. Not now. Not when you are the one who gives me hope." Riven's hand came up to his cheek, where a shallow cut had opened. His voice was rough, laden with both adrenaline and emotion. "Every saved breath reminds me why I must fight, not just for honor, but for the love that binds us." He gripped her hand tightly, their closeness kindling a spark that had long lain dormant beneath the weight of war. Moments later, Zilla reappeared, her combat gear smeared with dust and resolve. Enough time for soft words, she stated, though there was an unmistakable vulnerability in her tone. "I will lead a counterstrike behind enemy lines, but know this. I fight not only to avenge Vox, but to secure a future where our love, our unity can truly flourish." In the secure war room, the trio gathered around a holographic map as Riven outlined his bold strategy. "We'll abandon the predictable formations. Warlord Trask reassign our troops into staggered clusters that lure the enemy into natural choke points. Let their own arrogance be their undoing. This isn't just a defensive maneuver. It's the beginning of a new way to wage war, one that will confound our foes and inspire our allies." Warlord Trask's mechanical eyes seemed to nod in agreement. "Unconventional, my lord, but effective against a force that expects routine. Your human tactics are a wild card." Kara Zinthra's gaze softened as she examined the schematics. "Your strategies are audacious, Riven. I never imagined I could admire tactics so passionate and unpredictable. In every feint, I see the heartbeat of a man willing to risk everything for those he loves." A secure channel crackled, and Seraphine Veltari's measured voice filled the room once more. "I've intercepted confidential communiques houses. Tarvek and Centaur, along with several minor clans, are ready to support us. Their messages speak of betrayals within Krovak's ranks. Our allies believe in justice and in us." Her tone dropped to an almost conspiratorial whisper. "Every secret message is a promise of trust. Riven, you have all of mine." Across the fortress, preparations for the upcoming conclave and battle were in full swing. In the sacred ceremonial hall, where Overlord Kervox's body lay in dignified repose, Riven stood before a gathering of warriors and dignitaries. His voice, resonant and clear, carried through the vast chamber. "Let our silence now be a vow," he declared, gesturing to the tokens of remembrance arranged at the Baron's statue. "Each token signifies our promise that Vox's legacy will endure within us, that his spirit guides our every act." His words, imbued with both sorrow and defiance, momentarily stilled the hardened hearts of his alien compatriots. Before the ceremony could conclude, the sanctuary was rocked by a series of explosions. Enemy forces surged through the perimeter, shattering the solemnity with brutal violence. Riven leaped from the podium, rallying his troops with a roar that blended defiance and raw passion. "I will not hide behind these walls," he shouted, brandishing his blade as he charged into the fray. "I fight with you shoulder to shoulder for our future and for the love that unites us all." Nyara and Zilla moved like living embodiments of both grief and fury. For Vox, they cried out, their voices harmonizing with the clashing of arms and the roar of combat. Their rallying cries pierced the chaos, stirring the hearts of warriors who had once seen only orders and duty. Amid the melee, Riven's unconventional tactics began to bear fruit. Enemy lines, structured and expecting routine, buckled under the pressure of unpredictable maneuvers. The battle turned from a brute assault into a disjointed scramble, their foes falling into traps set by a commander who blended calculated risk with heartfelt passion. Later that night, under the shroud of darkness, Riven and Zilla led a daring guerrilla raid deep behind enemy lines. The silence of the corridor was broken only by the quiet beeps of calm links and the measured steps of two fighters who trusted each other implicitly. As they navigated the shadows, Zilla's voice dropped to a rare, intimate murmur. Riven, she began pausing as they crouched behind a supply depot. In the midst of all this carnage, there are moments when I long to forget the violence. All I want is to be lost in you, to find solace in our closeness, even if only for a heartbeat. Riven allowed himself a small, genuine smile. Then when this is over, I promise you, time will be ours. We'll build moments of quiet where our love can flourish without the weight of war. Their hands met fingers, intertwining in a silent vow of shared hope. Back at the fortress, the atmosphere grew tense with anticipation as news of the coalition's mounting descent reached every corner of the stronghold. By dawn, High Commander Varric of House Krovax had issued a challenge, a ritual duel to settle the honor dispute between their peoples. The challenge, delivered with pomp and gravity in a chamber set aside for such trials, electrified the gathered clans. In the preparation room, Riven's two wives closed in around him. Seraphine Veltaari's eyes, luminous with empathy, met his as she said, "Let your heart guide you." Riven, your strength is not measured only by your arm, but by the courage of your soul. Zilla's tone, normally as hard as tempered steel, softened to reveal an uncharacteristic tenderness. Today, you represent us all. Fight with honor and show that mercy is as potent a weapon as any blade. Their words wrapped around him, imbuing him with a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. In the arena, under the watchful eyes of ancient traditions and a captive audience, Riven faced Varric. The duel was a dance of clashing steel and divergent cultures, a test of both technique and philosophy. Varric's blows were steeped in tradition and cold precision, yet Riven's every movement was a study in human ingenuity. He parried, he dodged, and finally, with a decisive twist, disarmed his opponent. Instead of delivering a fatal strike, Riven extended his hand. "Yield," he said steadily, "and let honor triumph over hatred." A heavy silence fell over the arena, Varric breathing hard and pride wounded more deeply than his body hesitated. Then slowly, he accepted the outstretched hand. "I yield," he murmured, his voice tinged with reluctant admiration. "I see now that strength coupled with mercy can reshape destinies." The duel, marked by compassion and unexpected grace, sent ripples through the assembly. What had begun as a spectacle of combat transformed into a cultural turning point, challenging old paradigms and inspiring hope. In the conclave that followed, representatives from houses, Tarvek Zintar and several minor clans debated the future of their society. Riven, now recognized as a leader who bridged the gap between ancient customs and new ideas, spoke with a vision that resonated deeply. "Let us honor Overlord Kervox by preserving his legacy," he proclaimed, "but also by embracing reform, a fusion of human innovation and our storied tradition. I will lead not as a conqueror, but as a guardian of our future." Debates grew heated, yet as Riven spoke, his eyes found Seraphine Veltaari's and then Zilla's, and in that silent exchange lay the promise of unity, a shared destiny built not on bloodshed alone, but on compassion and understanding. That evening, in the quiet intimacy of his private chamber, Riven gathered his two beloved wives close. "This is our home now," he whispered, his voice a blend of hope and tenderness, "a sanctuary where every scar tells our story and every heartbeat sings of our united future." Seraphine Veltaari reached up her fingers, caressing his jaw as if to etch the moment into memory. "I have witnessed your courage on the battlefield, but even more so in these quiet moments between the storms. I choose you, Riven, not for conquest, but for the promise of our shared tomorrow." Zilla stepped forward, her gaze fierce yet gentle. In you, I have found not the shadow of Vox, but the dawn of a new era. Let our passion guide us as we rebuild together, not as conquerors, but as custodians of love and honor, their hands intertwined, sealing a bond forged in the crucible of war and softened by the tender caress of intimacy. In the days that followed, Riven set forth sweeping reforms. He reorganized the fortress's military with unconventional human tactics that confounded enemy strategists. Zila, who had once scorned his methods, now watched with growing respect as his unpredictable maneuvers forced Lord Virelthorn's forces into disarray. Meanwhile, Seraphine Veltari worked tirelessly behind the scenes, transmitting secret communications from sympathetic houses. House Tarvek, House Zintar, and several minor clans ready to rally against their common foe. Late one evening, as the fortress quieted and the storm outside subsided into a rhythmic drizzle, Riven, Seraphine Veltari, and Zila convened in a secluded conclave chamber. The low murmur of strategists and the rustle of ancient maps filled the air. "We must turn the tide," Riven said, his voice resolute. "Lord Virelthorn believes that by launching a full-scale assault, now he can crush our spirit. But if we counterattack with the cunning of guerrilla tactics, we will shatter his confidence." Zila's eyes gleamed in the candlelight. "I propose a daring raid behind enemy lines. A strike force led by myself and a select few will disable their command center, Riven. Your strategies have already sown confusion in their ranks. With one decisive blow, we can change the momentum entirely." Seraphine Veltari's voice, low and persuasive, added, "And I have arranged for further support. Our allies, alerted by my secure channels, will be ready to reinforce our position at the precise moment our enemies will be caught between relentless assaults and internal discord." Riven nodded, his gaze firm as he surveyed the room. "Then it is settled. Tonight, under the cover of darkness we strike. Let our enemies feel the full force of our unity, and let our love be the spark that ignites our victory." The plan set the trio parted with renewed determination, each carrying the weight of both their personal bonds and the hopes of their people. At the break of dawn, the fortress prepared for a final confrontation. In the midst of a sacred ceremony to honor Overlord Care Vox, the very ceremony where human memorial traditions were introduced to awe even the most skeptical of the alien attendees, explosions tore through the ceremonial hall. Coalition forces, emboldened by their leader, Krovax, launched a brutal attack during the morning rites. Riven, standing at the center of the chaos, cried out, "Defenders, stand with me." He plunged into battle, not from behind a safe command post, but in the thick of the fighting. His blade a blur as he fought alongside every soldier. "I will not hide my honor, demands that I share every hardship, every victory with my people." Seraphine, Veltari, and Zila rushed to his side, their voices raised above the clamor of war. For Vox, they roared in unison, their words igniting the hearts of even the most battle-hardened warriors. Amid the clashes, Riven's unconventional tactics began to yield results. The enemy, structured and overconfident, faltered as traps and ambushes turned their own momentum against them. Later, as twilight settled and the last echoes of battle faded, Riven convened a secret meeting with his inner circle. "Our defenses held, but the war is far from over," he said, his tone somber yet determined. "Lord Virelthorn's forces will regroup, and we must be ready. We have proven that our unconventional methods can turn the tide. Now let us prepare to strike further, both in battle and at the upcoming conclave." Zila, her expression both hardened by conflict and softened by newfound respect, spoke quietly. "I will lead a second strike force. Behind enemy lines, we will sow further chaos among their ranks. Let them know that our strategies are as unpredictable as our resolve." Seraphine Veltari, ever the diplomat, added, "I have secured additional evidence of Lord Virelthorn's treachery. With these proof in hand, we will expose his crimes at the conclave, shattering his claim to legitimacy." Riven's gaze lingered on his two wives, and in that moment, the convergence of duty and desire was palpable. "I have learned that true strength, comes not only from the art of war, but from the passion that binds us. I promise you, after this storm passes, we will have time for the quiet moments, for the tenderness that makes us human." Their voices mingled with the subdued clamor of the fortress, preparing for the next phase of conflict, each word a pledge to both duty and love. High Commander Varric's earlier duel was but one emblem of change, a moment when old traditions were upended by mercy and honor. And now, with the coalition forces in disarray and a growing chorus of allies rallying behind Riven's vision, the stage was set for a final confrontation that would redefine the future of their people. As the conclave convened later that night, Riven's reforms and tactical innovations were laid out before a skeptical assembly. "Let us forge a new path, a blend of our revered customs and the innovations that human ingenuity offers," he proclaimed. His words rippled through the chamber, stirring debate, reflection, and ultimately cautious agreement. One by one, the voices of dissent softened into murmurs of acceptance until the conclave emerged united behind a vision of progress tempered by tradition. And now, as the dawn of a new era neared Riven, Seraphine Veltari and Zilla, each scarred by battle yet emboldened by love, stood together ready to lead their people into an era of peace and honor. One crisp morning, as the Electro-Veil rift field receded to reveal a hopeful sky, Riven, Seraphine Veltari, and Zilla walked along the ramparts. "Our people have embraced change," Riven remarked quietly, his eyes scanning the horizon. Seraphine Veltari replied, "They see in you the unity of strength and compassion. That is the legacy Vox would have wanted." Zilla added her tone, firm yet gentle, "And our household, bound not by fate, but by choice, stands as a testament to a new era. Together, we are the future." The three shared a look of resolute determination, their bond unbreakable as they prepared to usher in a time of peace and progress, a time when honor and innovation walked hand in hand.